Lady who inherited a title. Chapter 1. The London Miss. In the bustling heart of London, where the air was thick with coal smoke and the clamour of commerce, Miss Ilara Finchley's world was the size of a modest townhouse on a tidy, unremarkable street. Her life was one of quiet diligence, spent in the shadow of her father, a respectable if undistinguished solicitor. Ilara was his assistant, confidant and housekeeper, her days a measured rhythm of copying deeds, managing correspondence, and ensuring his tea was always hot. At 24, she was considered by the ton to be firmly on the shelf, a state she accepted with a practicality that bordered on serene. She had no head for frivolous fashions and no patience for the shallow games of the marriage market. Her mind, sharp and orderly, found its satisfaction in the neat precision of a well-drafted contract or the satisfying click of a problem solved. The news of her inheritance arrived not with the solemnity of a family lawyer, but with the frantic energy of a dust-covered messenger on a lathered horse. He clattered to a stop outside their door, delivering a letter that bore a heavy wax seal, unfamiliar and stamped with a wild, stylized thistle. Her father, Mr. Alastair Finchley, turned the letter over in his hands, his brow furrowed. "For you, Ilara, from Scotland, from the office of Messrs. Campbell and Campbell, writers to the signet." Ilara took it, a tremor of unease running through her. Scotland was a foreign land of mist and mountains in her imagination, a place her father rarely spoke of, for his own origins were a subject he deftly avoided. She broke the seal and unfolded the stiff parchment. The legal jargon swam before her eyes for a moment, then resolved into a staggering truth. Her great-uncle, a man she had never met, Ewan MacGregor, the Laird of Dún Coile, was dead. And she, Ilara Finchley of London, was his sole surviving heir. The title of Lady MacGregor, and with it, the keep and its lands, was now hers. The room swayed. She lowered herself onto a chair, the letter dangling from her fingers. "Ilara, what is it?" her father asked, his voice tight with concern. "Papa, did you know that your mother's brother was a Scottish laird?" A strange, sad light flickered in Alastair Finchley's eyes. He walked to the window, his back to her. "I knew. Ewan was my mother's elder brother. But she left, you see. Ran off with an English soldier, my father. It caused a terrible rift. The MacGregors are a proud clan, proud and unforgiving. She was cast out, her name struck from the family Bible. We were never spoken of." Ilara looked back at the letter, the words, eldest lineal descendant, leaping from the page. He had no children of his own. No one else. "None that lived," her father said softly, turning to face her. "The old laird outlived them all, and so it falls to you, Ilara, the last leaf on a forgotten branch." The next fortnight was a whirlwind of disbelief, practical arrangements, and a journey north that felt like a passage to another world. The tidy green fields of England gave way to wilder, rougher landscapes. Hills swelled into mountains, their peaks shrouded in cloud. The very light seemed different, paler, sharper. By the time their hired carriage began to labour up a narrow, winding track into the highlands, Ilara felt as though she had shed her London self like a skin. Dún Coile, when it finally came into view, was not the romantic, ivy-clad castle of her imaginings. It was a stark, formidable keep of grey stone, crouching on a rocky outcrop above a dark, narrow loch. It was ancient and unadorned, a fortress built for defence, not comfort. As they drew closer, the wind carried the scent of peat smoke and damp earth, a raw, elemental smell utterly alien to her. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. A small group of people had gathered in the gravel forecourt. At their head stood a man who could only be described as formidable. He was tall, with a broad-shouldered frame clad in a simple tweed jacket and kilt of a deep, muted green and blue. His hair was the colour of dark heather, and his face was all sharp planes and a firm, unsmiling mouth. This, she knew from the letters, must be Callan MacNeill, the Laird of Glendu, and the factor, the estate manager, appointed by her great-uncle to run the lands. He was, the lawyers had explained, the nearest male relative and the traditional right-hand man to the MacGregor chief. He stepped forward as the carriage door was opened, his gaze sweeping over her unadorned travelling dress and sensible bonnet with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't disdain, but a kind of intense assessment, as if he were trying to find the hidden steel in a blade that looked too delicate. "Miss Finchley," he said. His voice was a deep burr, as rugged as the landscape. "Welcome to Dún Coile. I am Callan MacNeill. On behalf of the clan, I offer you our respects." The hesitation before respects was a chasm. It spoke of duty, not welcome. Ilara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. MacNeill. It is more than I expected." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed his features. He offered his arm, a gesture of formal courtesy, and she took it. His arm was like iron beneath the tweed. As he led her towards the great iron-studded door of the keep, she was acutely aware of the other people watching. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and a frank, unvarnished assessment that was far more unnerving than the polite but cutting scrutiny of London society. "The housekeeper, Mrs. MacDougall, will show you to your chambers," Callan said. "The funeral is tomorrow. After that, we have much to discuss." It was not a welcome, but a summons. As the heavy door closed behind her, plunging her into the chill stone-flagged gloom of the great hall, Ilara felt the full, crushing weight of what she had inherited. It was not a title, not a home. It was a fortress full of strangers who looked at her as if she were an invader. Chapter 2. The Unwelcome Heir. The great hall of Dún Coile was a cavernous space, lit by a struggling fire and the weak light filtering through narrow windows. Ilara sat at the head of a vast oak table, a position that felt both absurd and profoundly uncomfortable. Across from her sat Callan MacNeill, a large map of the estate spread between them like a battlefield plan. The funeral that morning had been a stark affair. She had stood apart, a black-clad figure among a sea of kilts and solemn faces, feeling the weight of 100 stares. They had sung a lament in Gaelic, a keening, haunting sound that had raised goosebumps on her arms. Afterwards, not a single person had approached her. They had filed past Callan MacNeill, shaking his hand, murmuring to him in their own tongue, completely ignoring the new lady of the clan. It had been a masterclass in exclusion, and it had stung more than she cared to admit. Now, in the hall, she faced the man who was clearly the true power here. "The estate is not in good health, my lady," Callan began, his finger tracing a line on the map. "Your great-uncle was of the old school. He was more concerned with the honour of the clan than its accounts. The rents from the crofts to the south have fallen into arrears. The sheep farming in the East Glen has been mismanaged for a decade, and the roof of the keep itself leaks in a dozen places." Ilara listened, her mind clicking into the orderly mode she used for her father's ledgers. "Show me the figures, the rent rolls, the accounts for the sheep farming, the estimate for the roof repairs." Callan blinked, clearly taken aback. He had expected, she realised, a helpless London miss who would weep at the sight of a column of numbers. He produced a leather-bound book from a satchel. "The accounts are informal." Ilara opened it. It was a mess. Scraps of paper, half-finished sums in fading ink, notations in Gaelic she couldn't understand. It was the opposite of everything she knew. She closed the book gently. "Informal is one word for it, Mr. MacNeill. Chaotic is another. I will need to see the tenants' leases, a proper inventory of the livestock, and a clear statement of the estate's debts. And I will need a reliable translator for the Gaelic portions of these documents." For the first time, a crack appeared in his stoic facade. "You mean to do this yourself?" "Who else is there?" she asked, a note of genuine puzzlement in her voice. "I am the Laird, lady, whatever the correct term is. It seems foolish to inherit a problem I do not understand. The term is ban tigherna, he said, the Gaelic word rolling off his tongue with an ease that made it sound like music. It means lady of the house, and the running of an estate like Dun Coile is not a matter for ledgers in a London townhouse. It's about people, about tradition, about the land itself. His tone was not unkind, but it was deeply patronising. Ilara felt a spark of the steel her father always claimed she possessed. Then it's fortunate, Mr. McNeill, that a ledger is simply a way of recording the lives of people, their traditions, and their relationship with the land. If the people are not paying their rents and the land is not yielding its potential, the ledger will show it. And then we must ask why. She rose from the table, feeling the need to assert some kind of authority, however small. I will take a walk to clear my head and see this place for myself. Callan stood immediately. I will accompany you. The paths can be treacherous for those who don't know them. It was an order disguised as a courtesy. She inclined her head. As you wish. The wind outside was sharp, carrying the scent of loch water and wet granite. They walked in silence for a while, following a path that skirted the edge of the dark water. Ilara wrapped her shawl tighter, her eyes taking in the harsh beauty around her. It was a landscape that demanded respect, not affection. They came upon a cluster of low stone cottages, their roofs heavy with turf. This was one of the crofting townships. As they approached, a woman emerged from one of the cottages, carrying a pail. When she saw them, she stopped dead. Her eyes, sharp and bright in a weathered face, moved from Ilara to Callan, and her expression soured. She spat on the ground, turned on her heel, and went back inside, slamming the door. Ilara flinched as if she'd been struck. What did I do? Callan's jaw was tight. That is Morag Stewart. Her son, Fergus, was evicted from his croft 3 months ago, by your great-uncle. He now works as a day labourer, and his family is scattered. Evicted? For what reason? The land was wanted for sheep. A more profitable use, the old Laird said. She looked at the closed door, feeling a deep, cold shame. This was her legacy, a family destroyed for the sake of a few more sheep. And you, as factor, did you agree with this? Callan met her gaze, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes. I was against it, but I was the factor. I served the Laird's will. It was not my place to gainsay him. The admission hung in the air between them. It spoke of a man bound by duty, even when that duty went against his own principles. It made him, in Ilara's eyes, both more admirable and more tragic. My great-uncle's will is no longer the law here, Mr. McNeill, she said quietly. Where is this Fergus Stewart now? He works at the stables at Glendu, my own estate, Callan said, surprised. Then tomorrow, Ilara said, turning back towards the keep, her voice carrying a new note of determination. You will take me to Glendu. I would like to speak with him. That night, Ilara sat in the cold, cavernous library of Dun Coile, a single candle fighting the shadows. She had found a stack of old letters, tied with ribbon, in a desk drawer. They were from her grandmother, the disgraced sister who had run away with an Englishman. They were full of love and pain and a desperate longing for home. The last one, written on her deathbed, was addressed to her brother, the old Laird. Ewan, it read, I forgive you. I hope one day you can forgive me. My only wish is that the hills of Dun Coile might one day know my child's child. Tell them I am sorry. Tell them I always loved the sound of the wind in the pines. The letter was unsent. It lay, among others, proof that the old Laird had read his sister's pleas and, it seemed, had never replied. A cold fury, unlike anything she had ever felt, began to kindle in Ilara's heart. It was not a fury at the living, but at the waste, the pride, the long, cold silence of the dead. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. This was not just a matter of ledgers and leaky roofs. It was a matter of healing a wound that had festered for a generation. Chapter 3. The Laird's War. Glendu, Callan MacNeil's estate, was a stark contrast to Dún Coile. It was smaller, but it hummed with a quiet, purposeful energy. The farm buildings were in good repair, the fields were well tended, and the people they passed gave Callan nods of genuine respect, not the wary, resentful glances she received. It was a place that was clearly loved and cared for. Callan led her to the stables, a long, low building of warm, honey-coloured stone. Inside, the smell of hay and horses was immediate and pleasant. A young man with sandy hair and a guarded expression was forking straw into an empty stall. Callan introduced him. "Fergus, this is Lady MacGregor. She would like a word." Fergus Stewart stopped working, his knuckles white on the handle of the pitchfork, his eyes, full of a deep, smouldering anger, fixed on Ilara. "The new lady. Come to see the ruins the old Laird made, have you?" Callan took a half-step forward, but Ilara put a hand out, stopping him. This was her fight. "Mr. Stewart," she said, her voice clear in the quiet stable, "I know what happened to you. I know it was unjust, and I know that words cannot give you back your home or your peace of mind." He stared at her, the anger flickering, confused by the lack of defence. Words are all the gentry ever have. "Sometimes they are a beginning," Ilara countered. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, her own, neat version of the estate accounts. "Croft 7, in the Southern Glen, the one your family worked for 3 generations. It's empty now. The sheep are gone. The land sits fallow. If I were to offer it back to you, on a fair lease, would you consider returning?" The pitchfork wavered. Fergus looked from her to Callan, his face a battleground of suspicion and desperate, painful hope. "And what would be the price?" "My soul, like the rest." "The price," Ilara said, holding his gaze, "would be your hard work, the same work your family always put into it, nothing more. I am not my great-uncle. I am trying to understand this place and the people in it. But I cannot do that from behind the walls of Dún Coile. Will you help me?" The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, slowly, Fergus Stewart let out a long breath, and some of the tension left his shoulders. He looked at Callan. Is she real, or is this some trick?" Callan's gaze moved to Ilara, and for the first time there was no assessment in it, only a quiet, wondering respect. "She seems real enough, Fergus, and she's asking a fair question." Fergus looked back at Ilara. "I'd need to see the terms. I'd not be put out again." "You will see them, and you will approve them, before a single mark is made on paper," Ilara promised. The news of Fergus Stewart's reinstatement spread through the glens like wildfire. It was a single small act, but in a world ruled by tradition and precedent, it was a seismic shock. The sullen silence that had greeted Ilara began to crack. When she and Callan rode out to inspect the farms, the doors, once slammed, were now left ajar. Women would come to their gates, not with spittle, but with a shy, curious offer of oatcakes or buttermilk. Men would touch their caps, their eyes no longer hostile but wary, waiting to see what this strange Sassenach lady would do next. Ilara threw herself into the work. She learned to ride, side-saddle at first, then, on Callan's quiet suggestion, astride like the Highland women, which gave her far more control. She toured every croft, every sheep farm. She sat in smoky kitchens, drinking strong tea and listening to complaints, grievances, and, more slowly, stories. With Callan acting as translator for the older folk who spoke only Gaelic, she began to piece together the intricate web of relationships, debts, and loyalties that bound the clan together. The evenings were spent in the library at Dun Coile, the map spread out, the fire crackling. Callan would go over the history of each plot of land, each family, and as they worked, their relationship changed. The formal Mr. McNeil and my lady softened. He began to explain things to her, not as a factor to an ignorant mistress, but as one person sharing their deep knowledge with another who was hungry to learn. "You see this burn here?" he said one evening, his finger tracing a blue line on the map. "In the spring, the salmon run. It's the lifeblood of the two crofts on its banks. In my grandfather's time, there was a dispute over the fishing rights. It nearly came to blood." "And how was it settled?" Ilara asked, leaning closer to see. "It wasn't. It just became tradition. The folk on the East Bank fish on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, the West Bank on the other days. No one remembers why, but everyone respects it." Ilara looked at the map, seeing not just lines and names, but a living, breathing history. "It's like the ledgers, isn't it? A different kind of book, but it tells the same story." He looked at her then, a slow smile finally breaking across his stern face. It was like the sun coming out over the moors. "Aye, that's exactly what it is." But the old guard of the clan was not so easily won over. The opposition was led by Hamish MacGregor, a craggy-faced, white-bearded man who was the eldest of the clan elders. He was a cousin of the old Laird and had expected, many whispered, to be named the heir. He saw Ilara not as the Bantig Herna, but as an English interloper, a woman, and a Finchley, the blood of the woman who had shamed them all. One afternoon, Callan arrived at Dun Coile with a grim expression. "Hamish has called a meeting of the clan council at the Standing Stones tomorrow at sunset. He means to challenge you. He will claim you have no right to meddle in the old ways, that you're just a woman from London turning everything on its head for sentiment." Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty keep. A public challenge. It was the last thing she wanted, a confrontation that could shatter the fragile peace she was building. "What do they want, truly?" she asked. "They want the old certainties," Callan said. "They want a Laird they understand. They want you gone, and perhaps one of their own in your place. They see you as a threat to everything they are." Ilara stood, walking to the window to look out at the darkening loch. She thought of the unsent letter in her pocket, the decades of silence and pride. She thought of Fergus Stewart's face when she'd given him back his home. She could run, retreat to the safety of London, or she could fight. "What would happen if I didn't go?" she asked. "Then you prove their point, that you are not one of us, that you have no respect for our ways. The clan will fracture. Those who support you, and there are more now than you think, will be seen as traitors. It could tear Dun Coile apart." She turned to face him. "Then I will go." He took a step towards her, his face etched with concern. "Ilara, this is not a London drawing room. These are hard men, with old grudges. Hamish will not be polite. He will try to humiliate you." "I know," she said quietly. "But if I am to be their lady, I must face them. I cannot hide behind you, Callan. Not for this." He held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of respect, of a bond forged in shared work and mutual discovery. He gave a single sharp nod. "Then I will stand with you." Chapter 4. The Standing Stones. The Standing Stones of Dun Coile were older than the keep, older than the clan, older, it seemed, than memory itself. They rose from the heather on a high plateau, a circle of jagged, lichen-covered monoliths, silhouetted against a sky bleeding gold and crimson. The wind was keening, a lonely, ancient sound that seemed to whisper of centuries of gatherings, of judgments made, of fates decided. A crowd of perhaps 40 men had gathered within the circle, their faces ruddy in the firelight from a central brazier. They were the elders, the heads of families, the backbone of the clan. Ilara, wrapped in a heavy woolen cloak Callan had insisted she borrow, walked towards them. Callan was a solid, reassuring presence at her side, but he stopped at the edge of the circle. She had to enter alone. As she stepped between two of the towering stones, the murmur of voices ceased. Every eye was upon her. Hamish MacGregor stood in the centre by the brazier, his white hair catching the firelight like a mane of snow. He did not offer a greeting. "We are here," he announced, his voice carrying in the still air, to speak of the future of this clan, a future that now rests in the hands of one who knows nothing of our ways, our history, our blood. A rumble of agreement went through the crowd. Elara stopped a few feet from him, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her spine straight. "I may not know the names of every burn and bothy as you do, Hamish MacGregor," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I'm learning. I have sat in the kitchens of your kin and heard their stories. I have walked the land my grandmother was forced to leave." At the mention of her grandmother, a fresh murmur arose, more complex this time. Hamish's eyes narrowed. "Your grandmother was a shame to this clan. She abandoned her duty, her name, her blood, for the sake of a soldier from the south. Her blood is in your veins, and it has brought nothing but trouble." "Her blood is my blood, and I am proud of it," Elara countered, her voice gaining strength. "I have a letter she wrote unsent to her brother. In it, she spoke of her love for these hills, for the sound of the wind in the pines. She begged for forgiveness, for a word, for a sign that she was not forgotten. She received nothing, her heart broke, and she died in exile. That is the shame, Hamish MacGregor. Not that she left, but that you never asked her to return." The silence that followed was profound. She had struck a chord, and the vibration of it was visible on the faces of the older men. They remembered. They remembered the rift, the silence, the stubborn pride. Hamish recovered quickly, his voice a low growl. "Pretty words from a Sassenach, but words don't fill a belly or pay a rent. You go against the old ways. You gave Fergus Stewart his croft back, land that was rightly taken for the good of the whole clan." "Was it for the good of the clan?" Elara asked, turning to include the other men in her question. "A family was broken. A skilled man who knew that land better than anyone was driven off, and the land lies empty. Where is the good in that? A clan is not just land and sheep, Hamish. It is its people. A clan that throws its people away for a few extra coins is a clan that is already dying." She reached into her cloak and pulled out the leather-bound book Callan had given her, the one he used for his own meticulous records. "I have here the true accounts of this estate, not the scraps and memories the old Laird kept, but a clear picture of what we have, what we owe, and what we can become." She opened it. The southern glen, where Fergus's croft is ideal for a particular breed of hardy sheep. But instead of one large, struggling flock, we could have 5 families, each with a small, healthy flock, paying a fair rent and building their own prosperity. The prosperity of the people is the prosperity of the clan. It is not a difficult sum. She walked slowly around the brazier, her eyes meeting those of the men she had come to know. "Donald McIntyre, your son is a fine carpenter, but there is no work for him here. The keep has a dozen rotting window frames. If we employ him to repair them, we get a sound roof, and he gets a wage he can spend in the township. It is not charity, it is common sense." She had their attention now. She was not speaking of sentiment, but of practicalities, of a future they could see. "You say I am not one of you," she concluded, stopping before Hamish once more. "You are right. I am not. I am a Finchley, a London miss who prefers ledgers to lace. But I am also, by blood and by law, your Bantigheana. I cannot be the Laird you are used to, but I can be a different kind of lady. One who listens, one who learns, one who sees that the old ways are not a cage to trap us, but a foundation to build upon. I am not here to destroy your traditions. I am here to ensure they have a future." She fell silent, the wind whipping the flames of the brazier. The men looked at each other, then at Hamish. The old man's face was a mask of thwarted fury, but he could feel the shift in the air. The challenge had been met, and, if not won, then at least stalemated. It was Callan MacNeil who broke the silence. He stepped into the circle and stood beside Ilara. "I have known this clan all my life," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of his own heritage. "I have seen its strengths and its weaknesses. I have never seen anyone, man or woman, work as hard to understand it as this lady has. She does not seek to rule us, but to serve us. And I, for one, will pledge my support to her." It was the final piece. Callan MacNeil, the respected Laird of Glendu, the man who could have pressed his own claim, was openly and unequivocally on her side. One by one, the other men began to nod. Donald McIntyre stepped forward, then another and another. They came to Ilara, not with cheers, but with a quiet, solemn acceptance. They shook her hand, murmuring their names, their eyes finally holding a glimmer of respect. Hamish MacGregor stood alone. He looked at the circle of his peers, now gathered around the outsider, and saw his power dissolve like mist in the morning sun. With a muttered curse, he turned and stalked away into the darkness, his pride his only remaining companion. Later, the fire had died to embers, and most of the men had drifted back to their homes. Ilara and Callan stood alone by the brazier, the standing stones like ancient silent witnesses around them. "You were magnificent," Callan said, his voice low. "I have never seen the like." Ilara let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension of the evening finally releasing its grip. "I was terrified the entire time." "That is what made it magnificent." He turned to her, and in the dying light of the fire, his eyes were no longer guarded. They were warm, open, and held an emotion that made her breath catch. "You gave them something they haven't had in a long time, Ilara. You gave them hope." "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. "You gave me the knowledge. You gave me the courage. You stood with me." "I will always stand with you," he said, and the words were a vow. He lifted his hand and gently brushed a stray curl from her face, his touch sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The wind sighed through the ancient stones, a sound that was no longer keening but peaceful, a whisper of ages that seemed to bless the moment. Spring came late to the highlands that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the land. The slopes of Dun Quaile were carpeted with new green, and the loch sparkled under a sun that held a hint of warmth. The keep itself was undergoing its own transformation. Scaffolding clung to its western wall, where Donald McIntyre and his son were replacing the ancient window frames. The sound of hammering and sawing was a constant, cheerful music. Ilara stood in the great hall, now brightened by the new, clear glass in the windows. She was reviewing a ledger with Morag Stewart, Fergus's mother, who had become her most ardent supporter and had taken on the role of housekeeper with fierce pride. The old distrust was gone, replaced by a bustling loyalty. The door opened, and Callan strode in, his kilt swinging, his face alight with the same quiet joy she felt whenever she saw him. Since the night at the Standing Stones, their relationship had blossomed. The respect and partnership had deepened into a love that felt as natural and inevitable as the changing of the seasons. "The salmon are running in the burn," he announced. "Fergus has already pulled in a dozen. His wife is smoking them as we speak." Ilara smiled. "Good. The South Crofts are thriving, then." "They are. And I have news of another kind." He came to stand beside her, looking down at the ledger with amusement. "Still at work?" "The clan is saved, Bantigherna. You can rest." "A lady's work is never done," she teased, closing the book. "What news?" He took her hands in his his thumbs stroking her knuckles. "Hamish McGregor came to see me this morning." Ilara's eyebrows rose. The old man had kept to himself all winter, a sullen ghost of the old guard. "Oh?" "He brought a gift. A set of silver-mounted bridal ornaments that have been in his family for 200 years. He said they were for the Bantig Herna as a token of peace. He said he had been a fool, that pride was a cold bedfellow, and that he had watched what you had done for Fergus Stewart and for the others. He asked me to tell you that he is sorry." Ilara felt a lump form in her throat. It was more than she had ever hoped for. The last stone in the wall of resistance had finally crumbled. "Will you come for a walk?" Callan asked softly. "There's something I want to show you." They walked out of the keep, past the bustling workmen, and took the path that led up behind the fortress to a small, sheltered knoll overlooking the loch. It was a place of perfect peace, carpeted with early bluebells. "My mother used to bring me here when I was a boy," Callan said. "She said it was the heart of Duncoyle, the place where the land feels most like home." Ilara looked out at the view. The dark water, the rising hills, the keep crouched below them, now no longer a cold fortress but a home. Her home. She thought of the unsent letter in her drawer, a letter that had finally found its answer. Callan turned to her, his expression serious. "Ilara, I have spent my life in service to this land, to this clan. I thought I knew what duty was, but I didn't know what purpose was until you came. You walked into a place that saw you as an enemy, and you made it yours. You made it ours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was old, a simple band of twisted silver set with a single, small, smoky cairngorm. "This was my mother's. It is not a clan heirloom, not a symbol of power. It is just a symbol of love. Ilara Finchley, Lady of Duncoyle, will you do me the very great honour of becoming my wife? Will you bind your London practicality to my Highland stubbornness, and build a future with me, here, in this place you have made whole again?" Tears spilled down Ilara's cheeks, warm and unchecked. She looked from the ring to his face, this man who had been her sternest judge and her staunchest ally, her guide and her partner. "Callan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me the key to this land. You taught me its language. You stood with me against your own kin. There is nothing in the world I want more than to stand with you for all the days of my life." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Then he drew her into his arms and kissed her, there on the bluebell-carpeted knoll, with the wind in the pines singing a welcome and the whole of the Highlands spread out before them, peaceful and whole at last. The London Miss had become the Lady of Duncoyle, and in uniting the clan she had found her own true home, and her heart's equal. The end.